But first, well, it's official. Joe Biden is running for president. I mean, if you were watching here a couple of weeks ago, you'd have known this already because we brought you this clip of him letting the news slip at a White House Easter egg roll earlier this month.
I'll either be rolling an egg or being the guy who's pushing them out.
Come on, help a brother out. Make some news for me.
I plan on running out, but we're not prepared to announce it yet.
This time, though, it's official. President Biden announced his run not with a speech or a press conference, because, of course, that's where bad things can happen, as we will talk about shortly, but rather with a video. Now, here's a taste, and I want to set this up because there is a lot to unpack, and I reckon this slick little video is the best roadmap to show how the Democrat campaign is going to play out.
Freedom, personal freedom, is fundamental to who we are as Americans.
There's nothing more important, nothing more sacred.
That's been the work of my first term, to fight for our democracy. Every generation of Americans has faced a moment when they have to defend democracy. Stand up for our personal freedom. Stand up for the right to vote and our civil rights. And this is our moment. So if you're with me, go to joebiden.com and sign up.
Oh, and one more thing. There was also a very big hint that Kamala Harris would be cackling her way through another election campaign. You can't tell me that wasn't deliberate. So, what have we learned watching this? Well, it's Biden-Harris. That's the first thing. But that brings up the huge issue of having Kamala Harris a heartbeat away from the presidency when, well, the president himself is currently 80 years old, and not what we would call a vigorous 80 either. Naturally, the White House is staying stum over whether he would even commit to serving his full term.
The president planned to serve all 8 years.
I'm just not going to get ahead of the president. That's something for him to decide. I'm just not going to get ahead of it. And there's a 2024 campaign. Anything related to that, I would refer you to that.
So Americans have to understand that if they vote for Joe Biden, they're also very possibly voting for President Kamala Harris. And it is pretty clear that Biden is going to run a whole campaign here, just watching that video, around the themes of good versus evil, light versus dark, with Trump and the Republicans, the MAGA Republicans, cast as devils, working to tear down Americans' freedoms, limit their rights to vote, and commit every sort of ism in the book. This was a riff Biden has been exploring for some time, of course, most notably in his September speech at Independence Hall in Philadelphia just before the midterms. Remember that? That was the one where he stood there as the defender of American democracy, with the very strange optics of being flanked by U.S. Marines bathed in a weird red and black lighting scheme. But, you know, this is all just a bit too cynical for me, frankly. I mean, the idea that Joe Biden, the Biden administration, is somehow the torchbearer for American freedoms and liberties? Give me a break. I mean, think about it. What are the key American freedoms? Free speech, freedom of religion, freedom of association, all there in the First Amendment. This is an administration that has made an absolute mockery of all of these virtues, despite seeming to celebrate them all in Joe Biden's campaign video. Its 2020 presidential campaign, remember, hinged on enlisting big tech to censor a story about Hunter Biden's laptop with the help of Anthony Blinken, the man who would go on to become Secretary of State and 51 former senior intelligence officials who all came out to tell the lie, the misinformation, that the whole thing was a Russian plot. Now, this was election interference, and it was a violation of free speech, pure and simple. Despite all the shots in the video as well of people praying and worshiping in his ad, well, the Biden administration has also done little to respect freedom of religion and has taken a consistent position against the freedom of people to believe what they want and how to worship if it conflicts with the LGBT and particularly the trans political agendas. As attacks on churches have reached historic levels, the Biden administration's Department of Justice has gone lenient on their attackers. At the same time, an FBI memo revealed that agents had sought to infiltrate Catholic churches where they celebrated the Mass in Latin because it might indicate that those churches were hotbeds of alt-right activity. That's the same Biden FBI, by the way, which also sought to investigate parents who went to school board meetings to criticize things like transgender policies that allowed biological males into girls' locker rooms. So please, Mr. President, spare us the big pitch that you and your side of politics is all about freedom. Ultimately, this election will come down to how people are feeling about the country, and right now, they aren't feeling great. A majority of Americans, by a big margin, think the country is on the wrong track. The only way Biden wins the old question first put by Ronald Reagan, are you better off than you were 4 years ago, is because when Americans go to the polls next November, it will be 4 years since the pandemic was still in full swing. But Republicans shouldn't get too cocky. They will need a positive and optimistic message, one that fights on pocketbook issues as much as over the culture, if they are going to win with a candidate who is increasingly likely to be Donald Trump.